A big welcome back to our listeners and viewers of the Responsible Edge podcast, brought to you by the Anti-Greenwash Charter. Today, on this fairly dreary Tuesday morning here in the UK, I'm delighted to be joined by Brogan MacDonald. Brogan, thank you so much for giving up some of your time this sort of pre-Easter week to join us for a show.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Now, Brogan, you and I met it feels like some time ago already, sort of for a pre-show meeting, and you were explaining a little bit about, your background and experience and the things that you've sort of done so far in your career. For those of our guests that aren't aware of you and your background, we've got sort of 20 minutes or so to kind of, I guess, tell the story, if you like, of the origins of your formative experiences that have sort of helped shape your worldview, and then obviously what you've gone on to do with your career so far. So start wherever you like. I mean, we literally do, I guess, you go back to kind of childhood experiences or the start a little bit later. But yeah, for those that don't know, you and your work, just give us a flavor of your story so far.
Okay. So currently I'm head of sustainability in our building structures division in Ramble. Ramble are the largest foundation-owned company in Europe, and we work in multidisciplinary design in the built and natural environment. My role of head of sustainability and structures is quite a wide and encompassing role that covers everything from embodied carbon to circularity. I'm now focusing on regenerative design and regenerative thinking and what that means for the built environment, looking at equity and climate justice and biodiversity impacts of construction materials. So it started off typically just focusing on carbon, and how it has a really, really wide role, which I found very exciting. How I got into that is a little bit different. So I'm a chartered engineer, a structural engineer, and a chartered environmentalist, which is a bit more recent. And I've been an engineer now for 7 years. I was trying to think there. I graduated from Heriot-Watt University doing a master's in structural engineering with architectural design back in 2018. I was born and bred in Scotland, as I'm sure you can tell from my accent. But unlike most engineers who always say, like, I always wanted to be an engineer, like that wasn't something that I always wanted to be. So how I've come to my role, how I come to being an engineer and then to being head of sustainability is not something I ever predicted, to be honest.
Okay.
I've always loved the built environment, so there's periods where I wanted to be an architect. Mm-hmm. I also love art and design, so there's periods where I want to be an artist. I even once wanted to be a fashion designer. So yeah, from a childhood, basically wanting to do something very arty and creative, kind of went into a field that was, some might view is the opposite. Now, I don't, and this is why I chose engineering in the end, because I think it's a really exciting career that does combine the problem solving and the thinking with the creative ingenuity solutions and how we can build them together. There's an approach that they take in school that you're like this, you're a creative, more into like the arts or English and history, or you're into your sciences and engineering. I was very much told that at school as well, that you could really only be one or the other. And I got pigeonholed into the creative one, which I think is really unhealthy for children, to be honest. I hope that that's improved since I was at school. But the teachers kind of said you had to kind of choose that side. And it was only later when I had a really, really good teacher that expressed that you could do both, and actually you can combine them with a really, really interesting career. That's when it all came together. I became a vegetarian when I was 9 years old. So I was a very young climate activist.
Fantastic.
So that came into it. I mean, that was for slightly different reasons. When you're 9 years old, I liked animals. I didn't like meat. And it's grown into be so much more now as my career. And, I've not eaten meat since I was that age. And the personal sustainability that I have is really important to me. I just actually bought a second-hand electric car, which was a kind of big decision because it was a lot more expensive than a fossil fuel driven car. Choosing to purchase organic, locally sourced food is a privilege and a cost as well, but it's something that I think is really important that I embed into my lifestyle. So I guess I've come to where I am now through a lot of passion, passion for the cause and a personal purpose, a love of creative problem solving, and engineering a better future.
Brogan, that was an absolutely fantastic introduction, and it's posed many questions that I want to throw at you. So I'm pleased that I've got a sort of 13, 14, 15 minutes or so to ask you these. I want to ask you, and again, feel free to bat this back if you'd rather not, but you're a very, very senior and accomplished woman working in or coming from an engineering background, and you've alluded to your experience through education and that fantastic role that teacher had of not allowing you to be pigeonholed, if you like, from a creative versus a sort of a more problem solving, if you like, practical approach, which then combined. Just, if you don't mind, talk us through kind of what it was like being somebody that was interested in a STEM career as a woman, and your experience of that as you went through and made your decisions about higher education and into the early part of your career. I'd be fascinated to get a sense of that from you.
Yeah, it wasn't easy. So I don't come from a family of engineers or anything like that. I was the first person in my family to go to university. So for me, it wasn't super accessible, like the opportunities and the careers available. So I did a lot of self-discovery. I go in to talk to schools now, and I think that's amazing that schools have that access, because that's not something that I had just because of the school that I went to, and that it just wasn't part of their program. But I chose engineering despite having like mixed response and support from other teachers that didn't quite see that potential in me. I chose to ignore them. I went ahead with it. I found the start of university quite hard. There was about 10 to 15% of women in the class. I was in a civil engineering and structural engineering cohort. There was about 110, maybe 10 girls. I went on to do some really interesting internships. So I got sponsored my first internship with Mid Lothian Council in Edinburgh, working in their roads and bridges team. That was testing. We've got to pry in there.
Yeah,
I mean, like it's all the obvious stuff. Like I was working on construction sites or with teams, and I was the only woman. One site I worked on, there was like 150 guys. I was 19. This kind of young, like enthusiastic student that was just really keen to learn. And that was just not something that a lot of folk had time for. And yeah, it was really challenging. It built up a thick skin for me. It taught me a lot. I found those experiences really hard at the time, but it's always reflective afterwards that they were personality building, and they taught me a lot about the industry. Actually, those experiences helped me greatly when I started my job, because I've had various on-site roles as an engineer in Ramble, and having been able to talk with the teams, having the camaraderie, it really helped. It really helped. My position and thoughts on that have changed significantly, especially in the last year, around the role and the way women act when they work in a male-dominated industry. I kind of tried to blend in a lot and be one of them, one of the guys, because I felt like that was the way in which I would be heard and listened to. My position has changed in that, only I guess because I've got to this point of being more senior and having more influence, but I really don't do that now. I really lean into the softness of my feminine qualities and act in the way that I am, and try not to be something that I'm not, which I used to do. But I think that comes from a place of more privilege and like I said, having a bit more experience and trust in my colleagues as well.
And Brogan, and what impact has that had on the way that you're received and the way that you engage with your colleagues? Like, have you noticed a difference in the way that your team engages with you now that you're acting more, I might be taking this word and using it incorrectly, but more authentically, if you like?
Yeah, no, authentic's good. I like saying softness. I think that softness is a feminine quality that shouldn't be shied away from. I think it's something that is really powerful. It's like this divine feminine energy that we all have as women. I think it's a superpower, particularly in leadership. There's very mixed viewpoints on this, but I really like to lean into that. I think that people can empathize with you more. You can empathize with others. It helps create the bond and trust and authenticity in leadership. And I think that's something that I've learned as being a very young leader as well. I haven't had decades of experience like some of my colleagues have had. So I've really had to learn quickly about what styles are effective. And for me, that's just been really authentic.
And and I think any of our, we do have a younger audience at times that get in touch and talk about, the impact of some of the conversations that we have on the responsible age with senior people talking through their experience and how it can help them view things differently. And I think the way that you've described that, Brogan, if we can have, in particular young women out there who can be inspired by your story and your eagerness to act authentically as yourself within your role, I think that's a really strong message that we've already covered. I want to now ask you, I could ask you loads more questions down that route, but there are so many other facets to kind of run through. I now want to ask you about the sustainability, environmental sort of element of it. You wonderfully described that, being a 9-year-old vegetarian and liking animals and wanting to preserve as much as you possibly can. Just talk us through kind of, you mentioned that you went and did, your engineering degree. Like, at what point did the idea or the opportunity to build a career in sustainability become apparent to you? And what impact did that have on you in terms of your sense of satisfaction and possible impact in terms of your career?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. I knew as soon as I was in a few years in uni that I wanted to be an engineer that worked in conservation and historic buildings and structures, and preserving the heritage, but also the materials, creating material stewardship. And that responsibility for the next generation. That was something that I was very passionate about. I grew up in Aberdeenshire, where they have the most amazing castles. And I used to love going to visit them, and I was always fascinated about that elements of medieval architecture, I guess. I knew I wanted to do that. And so as soon as I started my role at Ramble as a graduate engineer, I went into working with the existing buildings. Now, I've done a little bit of heritage, not as much as I would like to, before I left doing the kind of day-to-day engineering. But basically one of my largest projects was basically the extension of a 1950s building in London. And we extended above, to the side and below it, which was really exciting. How do you extend below an existing building? It's a really good question. You jack the whole building up, which is so much fun.
Wow.
Yeah. And that was through, by doing that, we saved 5,000 tons of demolition waste and about 3,500 tons of carbon in comparison to demolishing it and building new.
Wow. And sorry, and this was during your early part of your career?
Yeah, so that project, I started as a graduate and I finished on it as a senior engineer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that was your sort of cutting teeth, if you like, in a professional role and sort of, having all of those sort of early professional exposure to what ultimately was then going to, determine what you wanted to do next. Just talk us through, once you got to your senior engineer role within Ramble, what happened next?
So I had worked on that project for 5 years, and usually that's like fatigue time for most engineers. They're seeking a fresh challenge, and it was going on a little bit. So we had at the time acquired and grown our APAC region of our business. So we had acquired a company in Singapore, and I went over to work for them for 6 months after that. So I got some really interesting experience working in the construction sector in Singapore, which is super, super different. Really interesting.
How was it different? Go on.
Oh, I mean, everything's different in the sense of the way they operate projects. The procurement is really different. Their building control is different. The one thing they had in common is we used the same codes, which was handy.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have to change too much from that. They use the Eurocode in Singapore as well.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, for me, it was more like the culture was super different. I work, Ramble's a Nordic company, so we have a very strong kind of family-based, flexible culture, and that's just not so prevalent in Asia. And the hierarchy is very different. The way people communicate is really different. And for me, the biggest challenge as a sustainability professional as well, in the UK and in Europe, we've got a really strong culture of challenging the brief or co-creating a brief together that it's more sustainable, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Asia, challenging is just not something that's welcomed. It's kind of considered rude. It can be considered rude. So, you had this passionate Scottish engineer activist come and saying, we don't do this, let's do this, and challenging everything. I think they were met with like, wow, who is she? Who is this? So for me, I was super naive. Honestly, like I reflect back on that experience, I was really naive and probably a little bit ignorant as well, actually, to how different cultures would approach these problems. And for me, that was just a huge and very valuable lesson. Decarbonisation, this is a global issue, right? We can work in our silos and pockets of industries and nations, but ultimately the ultimate goal is global decarbonisation. So that was really good. That was, again, another experience that really formed who I am today. And I learned a lot, and working with international colleagues in the future or having other types of partnerships with countries elsewhere, it really opened my eyes to different cultures and the way people work.
And brilliantly brings me back, in terms of listening to you, back to your point about embodying this, the softness, the empathy, the compassion approach that you have to working with your colleagues now, and how that needs to apply to working internationally with different cultural norms, etc., and different expectations as well. And I can really see how that all kind of fits together, if you like, to form the professional and the person that you are today. Brogan, let me brilliantly, as you can see, we've already kind of teetering close to our conclusion on talking about you, but it feels like such a whistle-stop tour already. But I want to ask you about the sort of long-term vision for you that you have for yourself personally. I love asking this question, especially if somebody like you who's done so much so early, but kind of what you're looking at next. Getting your crystal ball out, when you think about the rest of your career, what does success look like?
Oh wow. It's funny you say crystal ball, because I've got crystals all around me. I don't quite actually have a real crystal ball, but I do have crystals around me. I like my spiritual stuff.
I love that.
What does success look like? So I immediately think of like two things. I think about business success, and then I think three things. I think about global success, business success, and then I think about my success. For me, ultimately, like I want balance truly in my work and my personal life. That's something I am really kind of starting to understand more. I recently qualified as a yoga teacher, and I'm wanting to teach that on the side and find a way in which I can do my role and balance that, because I think that just yields much better results in work, and having that and being outside more. I just relocated to Scotland back home, so I wanted to spend a lot more time in nature, climb Munros, take out my stand-up paddleboard, that kind of thing. So for me, that's success. In a business context, specifically in Ramble and what we're doing right now, is we're moving towards what does a regenerative future look like. So we're operating in a very degenerative paradigm, let's say, right now, in which we are taking much more than we're giving back to our planet. We're trying to operate the sustainable, but to be quite honest, that would mean sustaining resources, which I don't even think we are there either. You go then to restorative, which is like keeping it neutral and kind of giving back a bit more. And the regenerative is about it giving back in perpetuity. It's a very utopian concept, to be quite honest with you. But how can we move towards that at a mass scale? Now, that itself doesn't work. You're talking about something in mass, then talking about regenerative and regeneration, which is just, they don't work. So my next problem, and something that I'm trying to solve within our business and the wider industry, is can we move into an industry that can still be profitable? And this is the big question and the capitalism of it all, while giving more back to our planet. It's a really tricky one. That's why no one's solved it yet, to be clear.
And Brogan, on that point though, how hopeful are you that there is a resolution to that question?
It's a really hard question. I'm pretty optimistic on it, but it relies on a lot of levers. It relies on some political levers and support from the Labour government to get there, as we have some fundamental issues in the construction industry that, with the support of legislation or policies, we could really pivot and move much quicker. That's one thing. The other is the mindset shift, which I get so bored of people talking about mindset shift. It's like, oh, we all need to collaborate. That just really bores me when people talk about that. We do, of course we do. Actually, we don't need to collaborate, we need to co-create, is what I'd say. But there's just a lot of people that are just stuck in these old ways. Like, construction is notorious for being the slowest moving industry to change. It took us 20 years to get out of poor health and safety habits to get to something that is pretty relatively good now. So I remain, dubious about the mindset shift. What I do know, and we've got amazing graduates starting with us that are so passionate. All of them want to be working on projects that do more good, and basically their role being something that makes a difference. Like, that is so important to this next generation coming into work. So I have huge optimism and faith that they will help and carry through. We've just got this problem with, I guess, people who've been burned by the industry in the past. Like, we've gone through, real difficulties and financial challenges. I understand why there's kind of worry and concern about changing something so radically. So I guess there's a balance. We've got to take people on board that have had difficulties change in the past, and promise them that it can result in a more equitable and just result for all humanity. And then taking through our next generation. I think there's a positive story there.
Brogan, I feel more positive myself hearing you position things in that way. No, and I think it's great. And there's real pragmatism in what you've described, but equally you can see as you say, a shoot of a light at the end of the tunnel, if you like. Brogan, we've nailed or overstated our sort of initial intro into you, but that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you for being so open and sharing a bit of your story with us. For any of our listeners or viewers that want to check out the various other things that Brogan's done throughout her career, we'll obviously provide links to a LinkedIn profile, etc. People to be able to check out. Moving forward, though, now, Brogan, can I possibly ask you to just provide a bit of a summary, bit of an overview for the article? I think it was in the Associated Press from April this year, just on the most recent news regarding Scunthorpe Steel. Would you mind just providing a bit of an overview, bit of a summary, and then just picking out whatever for you are the most interesting points relating to this news?
Absolutely. So I find this news and the headlines all really interesting and very important to my role. So as of this week, which is today's the 15th of April, the headlines are all around the UK's last major steelworks, which is in Scunthorpe, on the brink of closure. And the government stepped in over the weekend, which since World War II, this is the 6th time they've come in on a Saturday to to debate something. So this was a big and monumental push for MPs to come in on Easter weekend. And they've stepped in after the Chinese owner has halted their raw material order. Now, before I kind of go into the details of this, I think this story is really interesting because it isn't just about a plant or steelworks. It's really a test about how Britain is balancing industrial survival, net zero ambitions, and then economic sovereignty. So it's a real, like we can talk about the steel, and we will, but there's a real kind of wider aspect here about how these are all balanced. And we know from past decisions that has not worked out well. So we can talk about the history very briefly, because British Steel is something that's very important to our public, and that's why it has been so prominent in the headlines. Because in 1967, the UK Steel was nationalised, and it was then privatised under Thatcher in 1988. And we've had challenges through steel industry in the UK. It's had underinvestment, it's had offshoring, and the one thing that has impacted us significantly is these repeated foreign takeovers. So now the plant is owned by Jinghe Group, who are a Chinese company, and it is the last site in the UK that has traditional blast furnaces. There is another site in Wales and Port Talbot that's had similar news, which happened a bit last year, about the closure of those blast furnaces. That's a Tata-owned plant, and they have made the decision to kind of move over to electric arc furnace production with significant investments. They got £500,000, I think, from the UK government, and then Tata has put in the rest, which is about £750 million, to transition over to EAF. But the big reason that this Scunthorpe headline is so politically driven is because it's the last remaining virgin steel production in the UK. So if this was to close, and this is what was happening when Jinghe did not order the coke and coal to keep the blast furnace going, because actually when you stop a blast furnace, it's exceptionally hard to restart it. So you've got a furnace that's operating at about 1400 degrees plus. If you allow that to cool, you can only imagine the energy required to get that back up and running. So they cannot have any downtime. They operate over Christmas, on New Year. There's always staff there. And they have about 3,500 staff, I believe, that are working for or in relation to the plant locally there in Scunthorpe. So Jinghe stopped ordering the raw materials, which risked the furnace to shut down. So then the UK government had to step in. And so they created these emergency powers, which I believe is called the Steel Industry Special Measures Act 2025. They came in on Saturday to debate. So they've essentially looking at nationalising our steel again. But it's really important for several reasons now. Scunthorpe produces steel for lots of our industries. So it's rail, really big producer for rail, infrastructure, defence and energy. So it's a nationally strategic asset for the UK. And the big thing is that if we were to close it, it's the job losses. So expected that would be around about 2,000, perhaps more job losses. And there's no other large employer in the area. So we are going to have significant deprivation issues if that were to close, and the government do not consider other green skills or a longer term program that could have happened, which they could have done. This isn't new information. This has been something in the years, which is quite annoying, and there could have been a real strong push to reskill some of this workforce. You know, we have jobs. We've got so many green jobs that are coming, like re-insulating homes, for example. There could have been consideration for that. And it then begs the question of industrial resilience for the UK and that sovereign capability. So it's how do you balance the unionised jobs in communities that have few alternatives with economic collapse, so social deprivation and loss of those generational skills. So that's the kind of social, economic sustainability side of it. Now balance that with the net zero. So there's a whole piece here that the UK cannot meet their net zero targets with blast furnaces. Now that's kind of true. Blast furnaces are extremely energy intensive, very, very also other health biodiversity implications we should aside from carbon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's incompatible with this green transition that the UK is wanting to achieve. Hence, with Port Talbot moving towards EAF. Now, the big challenge.
And Brogan, sorry to interrupt you, but just for clarity, the Port Talbot sort of evolution of the plant, that the crucial difference is that doesn't allow for the creation of virgin steel. That's so it can only work on recycled steel. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the key thing that is perhaps not explained well in the public domain.
Yeah,
is that you're absolutely right. So blast furnaces make virgin steel using coal and iron, and electric arc furnaces use a little bit of virgin input, maximum usually 10%, but 90% of that typically is recycled steel.
Mm-hmm.
So they're taking recycled steel and they are heating it to the temperatures using electricity. There's a whole conversation on electricity in the UK as well. Our prices are sky high. Compare it to France and Germany, where they have less competition, I guess. So the steel producers are thriving in those areas. It's making it very hard to decarbonise steel in the UK with our sky high electricity. It's about double actually what they have in France. So that's one challenge that we have on decarbonising steel, is this electricity demands and what we have available. The second is scrap, the recycled input. Now, scrap is a constrained resource, and we actually only have enough scrap globally to meet about 1/3 of the virgin steel demand.
Wow.
So we can say electric arc furnace all we want. If we don't have the raw material, well, I say raw material, the recycled material input, it doesn't work. So this is the bit of the catch-22 where industry perhaps is not clearly communicating this challenge. And there's going to be some papers coming out later this month from various institutions within the built environment on the challenges of scrap. Because the long story short, you can specify all the recycled content, all the electric arc furnace you want on any constructional steel. It won't reduce global decarbonisation. It will not reduce greenhouse gas emissions. You're simply just allocating and removing scrap around the world. So what do? And this is the big point. We need steel makers that have dual decarbonisation pathways. So we need policy and investment that allow for dual decarbonisation. And what I mean by dual decarbonisation is we must decarbonise steel production, regardless of whether it is blast furnace or electric arc furnace, because we have to acknowledge that our demand for steel is still too great. And steel is for all sectors: cars, ships, airplanes, everything. Steel's in everything. So it's not, construction is only about half of steel demand. We have to reduce steel demand ultimately to decarbonise steel. So policy investment must dual decarbonisation, reduce, decarbonise our blast furnaces and electric arc furnaces. Secondly, we have to get our scrap better recovered. So currently, in the UK, we're really, really poor at sorting and recovering our scrap. So if we can have better facilities that help recover, sort scrap, then we can increase the scrap input material into electric arc furnaces, which would then support the decarbonisation. So we need to do it from both sides.
And Brogan, am I right in picking? By the way, that was absolutely sensationally summarised and introduced. And for anyone that wants to check out the original article that Brogan's just introduced, we'll obviously link to it in our various materials. But she's absolutely nailed the introduction there. Did you mention that there's only 1/3 of that scrap steel available of the total demand that we have?
Yep.
So out of interest, if we were to improve our ability to source the scrap steel, and I'm sorry, I'm butchering my language here. You described it far more eloquently. What likely kind of increase would that give us in terms of that steel requirement?
Oh, it's really hard because the flip side of that is our steel demand is going to increase by 50% by 2050. We're not decreasing, we're going up. We're going up. So really, we're almost in a near impossible situation because we are consuming far too much. Like, this problem is we have to use less stuff. We have to. That we are incompatible with this. All these decarbonized pathways could happen, but it's all hypothetical, because if we simply just, we need to reduce how many cars we're making, how many buildings we're building, how much food packaging that we are using. It all has to be reduced. Otherwise, this is kind of just lip service really to decarbonisation. So yeah, we've got enough scrap to meet a third of demand, which means we are going to always still need to extract more coal, some more iron. I would love to say that we could just use AF and little problems will be solved. It's just not realistic. It's a risk of greenwashing. And this is why I want to talk to you on the anti-greenwash charter as well, because we have clients and developers that are wanting to say, oh, we're using lower carbon steel. And to be quite honest, for specifying recycled content or electric arc furnace steel, it might look good for your project, it might look good for your investor KPIs, but it does not cut global emissions. That's the key message here.
And this is the uncomfortable truth. And I think it's important to raise it. And I think you've raised it brilliantly and eloquently, Brogan. Let me ask you this. So if you're talking about less consumption, or you're talking about less consumption of steel in particular within the built environment sector, like, what are the kind of, have we got any, like, you know, sort of can we build any optimism around new materials, or are we literally just looking at, look, we've got to find a way to essentially consume less and have a lesser demand? Like, how does it play out?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying this is the be all end all. Like, oh, of course, there's an abundance of opportunities, right? Abundance. First of all, recovering steel from demolition, reusing it, not recycling it, reusing it. I've been working on the steel reuse space now for about 4 years. I've done a few projects where we have reused steel directly from one building to another. You send it off to get recertified by a tester. As long as it doesn't have significant damage, essentially, it's good as new. Like, it's sitting in a building for 30 years, doing the thing that it was meant to do, the load and all that, absolutely fine. It does not damage the steel. There's this conception that when that building's finished, it has to go to recycling. Now, I guess that is something post-industrialization, that it's actually, because labor is expensive and it's really cheap to kind of process things now. It's quite expensive to deconstruct a building because it's very labor intensive. You obviously got to think significantly about health and safety. So kind of demolishing it with lots of plant is much quicker and easier. So we have moved away. It's a kind of refusal of common sense, to be honest, from just reusing materials. And, you know, pre-industrial revolution, everyone reused materials because there wasn't an option not to. We have to get back into that mindset. We have to. So recovering steel from demolition, taking a bit more time, it might be a bit more expensive. And that's where the challenge is, to convince clients, because it's a bit altruistic, saying this is the right thing to do. They're like, yeah, it doesn't stack up. That's the kind of challenge place that I am and many other professionals are in at the moment.
And Brogan, we're coming back to a previous point that you made around investment when you were talking about the article and the UK's government, of some of the frustration that you'd felt around investment in green skills, if you like. Is that one of the ways of reducing that cost, is having a more skilled, abundant green labor force, if you like, that can enable that reuse of materials in a more efficient way? Or is that's not going to affect it?
I don't know. To be honest, I'm not knowledgeable enough to know whether that would make a difference for Stack Up. We need more labor. I know that for sure. We have lost a lot of really skilled labor post-Brexit. So I know we need more. The challenge is, like, the cost of living's high, you know, so we have to pay labor as well. And that doesn't quite stack up as much as it used to for contractors. So somewhere costs need to go up. It's just where, and then, the end client's perhaps not going to pay it. They might reduce their scope. Then construction's economic activity goes down. There's huge implications for all these things I just don't know enough about.
Well, let's move back to what you. But I think also you're a very well informed individual, so I'm sure that even just that sort of reflection was very well positioned. But let me ask you: you were just beginning to talk about other solutions here, and we obviously talked about the reuse of materials, and I think that is such a brilliant call to arms, if you like, for this episode to say, look, we need to get back to that pre-industrialization attitude towards materials and the reuse of them. Give us some more positivity to look.
Of course. So we've also got bio-based materials. So they are regenerative by default. So we can build in more timber. Now, the thing with timber is it's equally a semi-constrained resource in the sense that we need to make sure its renewal rates match how much we take. So we have to use it sensibly. Now, timber is not something to be sensibly in tall buildings because the elements just get really large, essentially, because it doesn't have the same strength properties as steel and concrete do. So timber is really wonderful for what they call, I think it's called, sorry, I can't remember the name of it. Like, it's basically like 3-4 story buildings. I want to say Goldilocks buildings. I think it might be called Goldilocks buildings. And it's that kind of 3-4 story. It's just perfect for bio-based materials. There's more bio-based materials than simply timber. You've got hemp, and there's hempcrete now, so it's combining hemp with concrete. You've got straw. I've even seen something with eucalyptus today. You've got some mycelium, some mushrooms. There's some really interesting new bio-based materials come to market. And that's a mixture of insulation materials and actual kind of structural materials. That is really exciting. But again, it has to be in the kind of smaller scale as it's just not efficient in the higher rise. And also with the Building Safety Act in the UK, there's challenges around novel materials. So we have to be mindful of that. So steel and concrete should still be used where it's needed. Major infrastructure projects, perhaps taller buildings that are required. But we should try and look at reused or bio-based materials alternatives. Now, in concrete, there's so much coming to market. I actually can't keep up. We had to create a tracker because there's so many technologies coming to market. You've got bacterial growth concrete. You've got all these alternatives that you can add in. There's an abundance of technologies out there. The challenge with them is testing them, getting a client to come on board, take a little bit of risk, test them somewhere small and expand. There is calcined clay, which is essentially clay coming from the ground. You put it through some processes and then you can use it in concrete, which will displace the use of cement. And cement is super, super energy intensive and actually naturally emits carbon into the atmosphere through its chemical process. So if we can displace the use of cement, we're really onto a winner. So there's some good technologies coming to market. It's more about, again, going back to this pace of transformation in the construction industry. And getting people to buy in. We have some positive stories and we're currently working on an Innovate UK test project right now with a client in Wembley.
Well, it's brilliant to hear that. And Brogan, I think, again, it brings us kind of full circle back to one of your sort of original points around the mindset and the attitude of the sector and how that needs to evolve. And there does need to be, and hopefully through the graduates that you've described and the younger people that are coming into the industry, that there is that eagerness to sort of, to innovate, to think about how we can do these things differently and ultimately look to incorporate some of these new materials and these new ways of doing things. Old new ways of doing things, if you like. Brogan, brilliant stuff. Look, I know that's been a whistle-stop tour, and there's much more to say on this, but hopefully we might snaffle you for another show in the future where we reflect on some of these things a bit more. For now, though, if I can pose the magic wand question to you. So if I was to hand you a magic wand and you could change one thing about the commercial world this instant, what would that one thing be?
Oh, I would love for us to be able to consider donut economics as a recognised economic model in the UK. So for anyone that is not familiar with donut economics, it's about balancing the social sustainability with our environmental sustainability, and basically meeting the needs of all people within the limits of the planet. I'd really recommend having a look and reading Kate Raworth's book on donut economics. It's a fantastic, really interesting model that moves away from GDP as a measure of success. As I'm sure we're all aware that GDP doesn't necessarily equal happiness, and it actually equates to extracting more and using more stuff. So it's a model that can create happiness and health while meeting the needs of people in the boundaries of the planet. That's what I would love.
Well, that is a fantastic suggestion. I smile because we had a guest last week who referenced donut economics as being their magic wand sort of submission, if you like, as well. So very much agree with that. We'll obviously link to various materials for those that want to find out a bit more about donut economics, even easy for me to say. Brogan, thank you so much for joining us this morning. That was an absolutely fantastic show. I'm sure our listeners and viewers have enjoyed it too. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And that's it for today's episode of The Responsible Edge. A big thank you to Brogan MacDonald, award-winning engineer, climate communicator, and head of sustainability for building structures at Ramboll UK, for joining me for today's show. In this episode, we explored the sustainability challenges and engineering realities behind the UK's government's takeover of British Steel. While headlines focused on geopolitics, our conversation looked at what this moment means for the future of decarbonised construction, national resilience, and just transitions in the built environment. This episode was brought to you by the Andrew Greenwash Charter, championing responsible sustainability communications. Visit andrewgreenwashcharter.com to learn more. I'm Charlie Martin. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. See you next time.